Hey people. I had kind of a powerful question come through today. I guess it took the form of a thought slash question. But it basically amounted to this voice in my head as part of myself asking, am I serious about waking up? And it was interesting because on one level, it was kind of a challenge. It was like, came through just as I was sitting down to meditate, starting that morning process of being conscious. And there was a passage was coming back to me from Chögyam Trungpa's book, where he talks about how warriorship isn't necessarily always about rallying to win the next battle. He talks about it in the context of, like, if you've somehow gotten yourself into tough circumstances financially, and you get the call that your landlord is about to evict you and your bank account is overdrawn, you all at the same time, and you all of a sudden you're calling your friends to try and borrow enough money to avert disaster. And he kind of talks about, or he frames it as, rather than being a matter of kind of rallying, for lack of a better word, to redress the things you've ignored in your life, what if you embrace the challenge with joy? Is there a way to find the power within ourselves to know that the challenge is serving us, to know that the challenge is uplifting us, is driving us towards transcendence? It's moving the needle forward in our consciousness. And can we embrace the challenge from that standpoint? Another part of another passage that really has spoken to me over the last day or so is he talks about warriorship means never allowing ourselves to say, I'm falling apart. Never allowing ourselves and never allowing ourselves to say that I'm falling apart or I'm just overwhelmed. And also never allowing ourselves to say that about the world. The world is just falling apart. Human beings are just falling apart. We're all just falling apart. That kind of throwing up our hands. It's this interesting thing that happens when we say, oh gosh, the world is just falling apart. Between our political problems and our social problems and our climate problems and our economic problems, everything's just falling apart. And we sort of like make that proclamation. There's this weird relief that brings us, I think, because it feels like, I don't know where that comes from, but maybe it feels like we're freeing ourselves of responsibility for these conditions? As though we haven't created them. The problem is other people, other people's perspective, other people's opinion, other people's judgments or biases or prejudice or lack of intelligence, lack of thoughtfulness, lack of caring, lack of empathy. Other people's lack of whatever we feel is important is the problem. And there is this weird like letting go of responsibility. It's a sense of now, therefore, we are justified in whatever we want to do or in however we want to live. And I'm not saying that the opposite is necessarily true at all, that we're not justified in living the way we want to live. But I'm just saying there's this kind of closeted relief that we get by diagnosing the world as being hopeless. And what I hear in Chögyam Trungpa's kind of call to arms in a way for warriorship is when we don't permit ourselves to do that, when we don't allow ourselves the release of saying, I'm just falling apart, I'm just overwhelmed, the world is just falling apart, everything is messed up. If we don't give ourselves that, then there becomes this energy. It's like all of a sudden the energy behind the problem becomes our fuel. It becomes it's almost like the reason we do that is because the energy is breaking its bounds. The problems seem so enormous, so overwhelming, so unfigure-outable. And the various, factions of people entrenched in their position seem so irreconcilable that we just don't know how to hold that energy in. It feels like it has to just burst out. And in the form of like, well, what? It's like we feel like we have to throw up our hands. But what if we don't? What if we don't throw up our hands in the face of massively challenging problems that we truly don't have the answers for right now? What if we could take responsibility for problems that we don't understand and that we know we are not yet fully equipped to solve? And I don't mean that in a kind of arrogant way of like, claiming ownership over the solution. I just mean, what if we could hold on to that? What if the intractability of the problem didn't cause us to have to release and sort of diagnose as a way of escaping from the pain of the problem? How much energy could we then marshal if we could truly hold on to the reins of that wild horse? And it comes right back down to the personal level. Like if I am sitting in meditation, but I'm worried about my finances, or I'm worried about God, all the different things I worry about, my work life, my creative projects, my, whatever the things are that my ego is concerned about, all of those things are gifts. All of those things are giving me fuel. They're infusing me with fire, with nourishment, with energy, with consciousness, with provocation to wake up. And I think because I noticed myself this morning resisting that waking up, I noticed myself kind of wanting to look away. That's where the question came from, am I serious about waking up? Because if I am, then I can't look away. And whether it's my own personal problem in my own life, my own issues to deal with, or whether it's a global crisis that needs a collective solution, in each of those cases, I think that my value starts with being willing to be being willing to first not diagnose the problem as somehow, all falling apart or in some sort of terminal way, simply because it overwhelms my intellect. And then, second of all, becoming really curious and being willing to remain curious. Brene Brown answered the question of if you could take all of your research, everything she's done on vulnerability and leadership, and if you had to give only one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be? And she said, well, what I've observed is leaders, the best leaders, remain curious. Curiosity is the leadership quality above all that sort of separates good leadership, distinguishes good leadership. Curiosity, continuing to investigate, a desire, an openness, not a real kind of magnetic draw towards things we don't understand. And in our personal problems, that can feel like a lot. It's almost easier to do that on the global scale, because on the global scale, the problems are coming in, the crisis may be massive, but it impacts our personal life more incrementally and more globally, whereas our personal problems, my own stuff impacts me very directly and very day to day, very immediately. So remaining curious in that way is the real challenge. I feel like that's, if I can remain curious throughout my own questions and problems and challenges, then I will make myself more useful to the world as well. Because I'll know what it means to face that energy. I won't shy away from it. I won't run away from it. I won't need to slap a label on it so that I can just be at peace and not think about it anymore. I remember my brother was studying Hegelian philosophy back in the day, and he was talking about the difference between Hegel talks about a pure negation and a partial negation. And a pure negation is something that we negate absolutely. In other words, we kind of shut the door on it. And we are, as humans, we are predisposed to think and to define things in terms of pure negations, because when we've done that, it frees up our CPU. Our brain no longer has to think about it. Unfortunately, progress is almost always a matter of partial negations, where two contradictory things, we have to negate portions of each one, but not all of each one. There's always a synthesis. There's a process of synthesis, which is, of course, the foundation of Hegelian thought. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. This is how, and then that synthesis becomes the thesis or the antithesis to another set of things to reconcile. Anyway, kind of going down the rabbit hole on the philosophy there, but this is this whole question of like, how serious am I about waking up, and what does that mean, is definitely on my mind today. So thanks for watching, folks. So much love. I appreciate you. Hope you had a great weekend. I'll see you tomorrow.